I'm Margaret, 56 years old, and life has taken me on an unexpected journey. 2 years ago, my world changed forever when my husband Robert passed away. Robert was a kind man, but he was often lost in his work or deep in thought, leaving me to navigate our quiet life alone. I envisioned my days filled with gardening, attending family gatherings, and evenings spent and books that summer. Everything shifted when Liam came into my life. Liam is Robert's nephew, a vibrant 28-year-old, brimming with restless energy, fresh from a demanding stint in the city. He sought solace in the countryside, away from the relentless noise and chaos. His arrival was like a breath of fresh air, stirring something within me that I hadn't felt in years. Initially, Liam kept to himself, exploring the nearby woods or reading quietly on the porch. I respected his need for solitude, understanding that he was adjusting to a slower pace of life. However, as days turned into weeks, our interactions began to blossom. Liam had an uncanny ability to ask questions that made me feel truly seen for the first time since Robert's passing. Our conversations ranged from the mundane to the profound, each one peeling back layers of loneliness I had wrapped around myself. One afternoon, as I wrestled with a stubborn, creaky fence in the garden, Liam silently approached and offered his help, without a word. He began working alongside me, his movements deliberate and focused. A fraction of a second, his breath warm and slow, his body hardening and focused. His vision. Watching him, I couldn't help but notice how different he was from Robert. Where Robert was always preoccupied, Liam was present and grounded, his presence a calming contrast to the chaos I felt inside. As the days passed, I found myself eagerly anticipating our talks. Liam's company brought a lightness to the air, a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. His genuine curiosity about my life and his attentive listening made me open up in ways I hadn't thought possible. One sunny afternoon, the sunlight filtering through the trees, I decided to tackle the attic, a place I had avoided for years, too burdened with memories and dust. I had my hair back, grabbed some old boxes, and began sorting through them. Liam appeared in the doorway, his shirt damp with summer heat. "Need a hand?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips before I could respond. He stepped inside and effortlessly lifted a heavy trunk that's probably older than both of us combined. I remarked cautiously. He chuckled, setting it down gently. "Then it's a good thing I'm here to help." As we worked together, we stumbled upon a box of old photographs. I couldn't help but smile as I shared pictures from my younger days. Liam studied each one with thoughtful green eyes. "You were beautiful," he said softly, holding up a photo of me in my 20s. I laughed, brushing it off. "That was a long time ago. Doesn't matter," he replied, his gaze lingering on the photo before meeting mine. There was something in his eyes, something unspoken but unmistakable. The room seemed to hold its breath, the space between us charged with a new energy. I looked away, focusing on the box in front of me. These old things, they're just reminders of a life that feels so far away now. Liam moved closer, his voice low and reassuring. "Maybe it doesn't have to feel so far." I froze, unsure of how to respond. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "Margaret," he said gently, his hand brushing mine as he reached for another photo. "You don't have to do this alone. Life doesn't end just because someone you loved is gone." My heart raised, emotions swirling within me. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, allowing his words to sink in. How was it going to help him? My heart felt overwhelmed. Reaching out, I kneeled next to the desk to take a few photos. That evening, the house felt unusually quiet. Liam had gone out for a walk, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat on the porch, a cup of tea, warming my hands, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My mind kept drifting back to the attic and Liam's heartfelt words. When he returned, his cheeks flushed from the evening air, he sat down across from me, his gaze thoughtful. "You okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. Yeah, she said. "Really?" I nodded, though uncertainty lingered just thinking about what you said earlier about not doing this alone. Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I didn't mean to overstep," he said softly. I see how much you've been carrying, and I know what that feels like." His words caught me off guard. "You do?" I asked, searching a serious expression. "Losing people changes you, makes you feel like you have to hold everything together on your own, but you don't. Margaret, you don't have to." His voice was earnest, almost pleading, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, even if just a little. We sat in comfortable silence for a long while, the quiet between us soothing rather than heavy. When Liam finally stood to leave, he hesitated. "Good night, Margaret," he said softly. "Good night, Liam," I replied, watching him disappear into the house. The next day, I found myself seeking reasons to spend time with Liam, whether it was fixing things around the house or working in the garden. I felt inexplicably drawn to his presence. One afternoon, as we planted flowers along the fence, I decided to delve deeper. "Tell me about your life in the city," I asked. He spoke of long hours at work, the fast-pacing environment, and a lingering sense of feeling out of place. "Is that why you came here?" I inquired. He nodded his hands, gently brushing the soil. "I guess I was hoping to find some clarity or at least a little peace." I smiled, understanding all too well. "You've come to the right place for that." He looked up, his green eyes searching mine. "Have I?" he asked, his voice low. The question lingered between us, filled with unspoken meaning. I wasn't ready to confront it, so I turned back to the flowers, my hands trembling slightly. "Lady," he said, "I'm not sure I can be ready for you tomorrow." That evening, as I prepared dinner, an unsettling feeling settled over me. Liam sat at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album I had left out earlier. His fingers traced the images, delicately pausing now and then to study a picture. "Is this your wedding day?" he asked, holding up a photo of Robert and me standing in front of the church. I nodded, setting the pot on the stove. "It was a lifetime ago." "You look happy," he remarked, though there was a hint of something else in his tone. "Curiosity, perhaps, or sadness?" "We were," I replied, keeping my focus on the vegetables I was chopping in our own silent way. He closed the album and leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on me. And now I stopped stopping and turned to face him, and now I'm figuring out what comes next. Liam's eyes softened, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. As the days went by, our conversations grew deeper. He shared stories of his childhood, his dreams, and the moments that left him feeling lost. I, in turn, began to open up, sharing tales I hadn't voiced in years. One night, as we sat on the porch while watching fireflies dance in the darkness, Liam turned to me. "Do you ever think about starting over?" he asked. "Starting over," I echoed, unsure what he meant. "Yeah," he replied, "leaving the past behind, finding something new, someone new." His words took me by surprise, but I didn't look away. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I've always thought it was too late for that." "It's never too late," he said softly. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon. The storm had rolled in quickly, trapping us inside. I was in the living room sorting through old books when Liam joined me. "Need help?" he asked, his voice warm. I smiled. "Sure. These can go in the donate pile." As he knelt beside me, our hands brushed, sending a spark through me. A reminder that I was still alive, still capable of feeling. "Margaret," he said, his voice low. I looked up, meeting his gaze. His green eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite name, something that made my heart race. Before I could respond, he reached out and took my hand in his. "You're not alone," he said, his voice steady. "Not anymore." In that moment, the walls I had built around myself began to crumble. The days that followed were a blend of clarity and confusion. Liam and I had crossed an invisible line, one neither of us fully understood. But the comfort and spark his presence brought into my life were undeniable. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves began to fall, Liam and I decided to take a walk through the woods. The silence between us was warm, filled with unspoken understanding. We stopped by a small clearing, the world around us painted in waves of orange and gold. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Margaret, I've been thinking," he began hesitantly. I raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to continue. "I don't know where this path leads," he said, gesturing between us, "but I know. I don't want to walk it without you." My breath caught in my chest. The vulnerability in his words touched something deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. "Liam," I whispered, my voice trembling, "I don't have the answers. I don't even know if I'm ready to find them." He smiled softly, then took my hand. "Let's figure it out together." The simplicity of his words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had carried the weight of my past alone, convinced it was my burden to bear. But here was Liam offering to share it with me without judgment or expectation. As we stood in the clearing, the wind rustling through the trees, I realized something profound. Life doesn't always provide neat resolutions or perfect endings. Sometimes it simply offers a chance to start anew. I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his, and echoed his small smile. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, we sat on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket. The air was crisp, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet contentment that came from knowing that while the road ahead might be uncertain, I wasn't walking it alone. Liam glanced at me, his green eyes full of warmth. "You know," he said, "I think this is the beginning of something good." I nodded, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "I think so too." In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the world and the promise of tomorrow, I allowed myself to believe it. The past was still a part of me, but it no longer defined who I was. And as for the future, it was ours to write together,